This has been a really interesting talk to put together, so I'm actually really happy to be sharing it tonight. I want to talk through what imposter syndrome has meant for me and how it's kind of impacted on my professional life and some of the things that I've been using to, or some of the techniques I've been using to kind of combat that. So yeah, as Sam said, I work at Atlassian. I've been there for 3 years, just before we started getting really big. So it's been a very interesting journey going through something like that with imposter syndrome. Like Sam stalking me on the internet, it doesn't actually take long to search around the internet and see that there's a lot in the way of imposter syndrome and documentation and pages out there on it. A quick search gives you imposter syndrome, 10 surefire signs that you're suffering, 12 signs you might be suffering from imposter syndrome, 21 proven ways to overcome imposter syndrome. You feel like a fraud? Take this quiz. And it's also hit our popular culture with memes demonstrating that and playing on the joke that we don't actually know what we're doing, that we don't belong, and that we're just waiting to be found out. This is really kind of interesting when putting this talk together and finding this and seeing all these people talk about it. You'd be kind of misled to think that everyone's talking about imposter syndrome, that it's just this common thing that you go out and you talk about with your friends, and if you've got it, you've got it, if you don't, you don't. But actually, talking to individuals about this talk and putting this talk together, I got some really weird responses. Like, why are you giving a talk on imposter syndrome? To be honest, I was really taken aback by this, and after looking like this for a little while, I really thought about what they were saying and why they kind of thought certain things. And I actually ended up talking to a coworker about giving this talk instead. I was like, you know what? Maybe I am an imposter. Maybe I shouldn't be giving this talk. I'm not qualified in this space. I don't know anything about this. Maybe someone else should do it. So I had a chat to a coworker who very helpfully pointed out that he's never felt like an imposter in anything he's ever done in his life, in any role that he's ever been in. And he's quite happy to stand in front of a room full of people and tell them exactly what he thinks without any hesitation. And at first I was really annoyed that there was this person that lived like this, but that was actually really helpful. For me, I had finally found someone inside the organization that was like my polar opposite, who was completely comfortable doing what they were doing, and I could then use as a basis for, hey, am I actually an imposter, or am I just really crap at my job? So thinking about how imposter syndrome presented to me at first, it's a bit of a complicated history. For some of the anxiety issues that I had, I started looking at different coping strategies for dealing with stress and anxiety. It's quite unusual. Like, I have to get up in front of audiences to talk for my job, and it's actually quite stressful for me. So working through some of those anxiety issues and working through some of those techniques helped me understand a lot more about how I think and why I think the things that I do. But it also made me realize that my feelings of being an imposter are somewhat normal. You see, at first I thought, like the donkey, I was in a sea of normal people, who thought that they belonged, that they were comfortable in their jobs, they were completely competent, and they were just getting on with things. And then I was just waiting to be discovered. But in preparing for this talk and talking to people and Googling, I actually realized that that's the normal person. Everyone else feels like they don't belong at all. And this was actually really comforting, because then I could start having conversations with people about imposter syndrome and what it meant. And it's a pretty terrible thing to have, even in a small degree, because it attacks you on two fronts. First, if you're on the outside of success, it puts this enormous expanse between you and what your goals are. So big and so treacherous that you actually feel like you shouldn't even accomplish them. You can't accomplish them. You shouldn't try. Right? It just puts that so far away that it's easier just to go, you know what, it's all the way over there. I'm just going to be content being useless over here. And let's say you do manage to cross that expanse and get into that inner circle of success. It then doesn't leave you alone. It's constantly haunting you, trying to convince you that you're a fraud and that you're going to be exposed at any moment and be unmasked to all of your coworkers. So these front lines become really distressing, because you get to see how talented everyone else is around you and how amazing they are, and they talk about their success and they talk about the excellent projects that they've done. And you're constantly sitting there thinking, well, I don't feel great like that. Like, I don't feel really proud of the work that I've done. So maybe I'm really an imposter. These guys just look like they're naturally talented, naturally successful. And that's where another layer of frustration and stress kicks in with imposter syndrome. So you don't feel like you could have got there, you accidentally got there. Then you don't feel like you belong there, and you're constantly waiting to be unmasked. And so you start acting in really stupid ways. You start trying to be a really high achiever. You start saying, well, everyone else has the bar about here, and they do that pretty well. I feel like I'm about here, so I'm going to raise my bar. Now, if your bar is already there, you're actually now like trying to shoot well above what everyone else is doing. So while everyone else is cruising, feeling good about the work that they're doing, you're piling it on. You're adding more work, you're adding more complexity to what you want to do, and you're setting this really unattainable goal. What's worse is you continue to see your friends and your coworkers just being successful, right? And the more you see them being successful, the more you're convinced that actually your success for you is hard work. For them, it's natural. You are obviously the imposter. So you think, okay, great. I know how to fix this. I'll work harder. I'll work longer hours. I'll work faster. I'll take on more responsibility. I'll do that work to prove that I'm successful and that I belong. And that's dumb too, because now you've got really high standards. You've taken on too much work. You're comparing yourself unreasonably to people around you. You're setting them up as these amazing people who are doing amazing things just so naturally. And you are just adding and layering stress on top of yourself. This is bad too, not because it sounds bad. You know, you imagine this person in a workplace just being stressed out of their mind all the time. But this is actually bad because you're breaking down a core tenet of who you are as a person and what you need to be doing, which is building resilience to this kind of thing. When you can't accept praise because you see people being naturally successful, and when people compliment you for the work that you do, you're just confident that, well, they're just being nice, or they're not really taking into account all the things that went into this. So you can't accept this praise. You can't move on, and you start to erode your own confidence as well. Even where you see success, you have an excuse for that success. Either everyone else in your team was responsible for more work than you, and they were carrying your dead weight, or if you do that project on your own, imposter syndrome's got a cue for that as well, which is that you just happen to luck into this. You know, it's just completely by chance. Sound familiar? So the problem here is that you need these wins. You need these small compliments of success. You need these small successes in general, not just where people recognize them, but where you recognize them. Because this builds up your resilience over time to negative impacts of feedback, or when a project actually goes badly. Imagine you're in that scenario where you think you're crap at your job, you think that everyone else is naturally amazing, everything is work, and then suddenly you don't deliver something on time. Now, actually, you are being a little bit crap at your job there. The challenge is that you don't have any resilience to that. So everyone stands there and says, you know, hey, I delivered late. How terrible am I? That's it. I'm absolutely an imposter. This is the proof that I needed. So this is the voice in the back of your head that you have to really ignore. But when you don't have any resilience, when you don't have anything in reserve, you can't do that. So you need to build that up. And I'm going to hopefully tell you a few ways to do that. So let me tell you my story. A few years ago, I went back to uni, and that's when I started to see some problems. I went back and started studying initially criminology, but then ended up getting into forensic psychology, which was fascinating for a whole bunch of reasons, but not least of which is the reason most people go into psychology, which is I suspected something was wrong with me. So I started looking at all the various things that were coming up and the different types of mindfulness and exercises to kind of deal with anxiety, and I was like, this is great. I dug into that, and I still didn't really suspect that anything was going on the imposter syndrome front, but I started to realize that actually, yeah, something was wrong. So it started helping me identify these issues and these stresses and kind of cope with that. But I still felt like everything was going badly. I was struggling to keep a full-time job where I was having extra responsibility, be a full-time carer for my sick wife, try and run a startup and help run a startup. I was also on volunteering for a charity where I was being flown all over the world to run events in different cities, which sounded amazing. But I was getting no enjoyment out of it whatsoever. In fact, every time something new came up, I just felt completely overwhelmed. And on top of this, I was trying to get a tech meetup off the ground to find more people and kind of connect socially. I was literally waiting for the wheels to fall off, and in 2014 it did. I had a stress-induced asthma attack, and I ended up in hospital. And after a 3-day sleep, I woke up feeling pretty refreshed, but also very aware of the fact that something needed to change. I needed to take and put into action the things that I had learnt in psychology and identify something was wrong and start to change things. So I did. I changed jobs. And when I started at Atlassian, I felt really great. Because for me, it was the first time that I felt like I belonged in a tech kind of product world. You know, there's a company full of people just like me who love playing with product and love playing with technology. And I just really felt like I belonged. But it didn't take long for that imposter syndrome to start kicking in. I started thinking, well, yeah, my coworkers are doing a lot better than me. They have more responsibility than me. They're delivering better projects than me. They're on better features. Like, am I getting looked over for those things because I'm not great? Or, you know, are they just delivering and I'm, like, my stuff doesn't look good? So I started taking on more responsibility. And I started taking on more projects. And I started taking on more complexity. And I started doing the exact thing that is stupid to do when you have imposter syndrome. But you do because you think that actually this is what you need to do. And so I started to feel really bad, right? Like, I was in this company where the first time I felt like I belonged, and I felt like I was on the fast track out. Thankfully, Atlassian actually stepped in. So Atlassian has every quarter these events that are called Ship It Days. They're Hack It Days. They're basically where people can contribute something to the company in the way of product or something like that, something to one of our products or services for our customers, or something for employees. And they're given 2 days to just do basically whatever they want, and they have to present it at the end. Just after I started feeling really crushed by imposter syndrome, Atlassian ran one of our big ship-its in 2015, and one of the things that came out of that was a talk on imposter syndrome. Initially, I was a little bit skeptical, but I'd heard about it, and I kind of identified with some things, but I didn't really click with it until the main presentation. During the main presentation, they presented some research that they had done. They surveyed the entire company, and people had responded. And this is a company full of really smart people, really fast-growing company, and they were saying things like this. I wasn't sure if I could contribute any meaningful contributions to the discussions and held back raising my voice. That's not good. I feel like I don't deserve my job. I've been through the recruitment process at Atlassian. Everyone deserves that job if they've made it through there. But this is people that are actually seeing their job and seeing their coworkers and saying that they didn't actually deserve their job, they don't belong there. And what's worse is I feel hesitant to express my ideas. They're actively not contributing to the company or to their coworkers or to people that are reporting to them because they don't believe they have anything to give. So this project contributed back to the company and back to the employees, and they put together this reference guide internally. Now, internally at Atlassian, everyone can access this. Everyone in the company sees this portal pretty much every day. They don't see this content specifically, but they can find it. It's open to everyone. And not only that, but then our CEO started promoting it as well, which was really great because it gave a lot of information to people about, hey, you might have imposter syndrome, and that's OK. This is how to talk about it. This is how to identify it, and this is what you can do about it. They went one step further. They actually started producing guides for managers so that managers who are managing people with imposter syndrome could identify it early, know that people were either at risk or not, and start having that conversation early. What was great is it went into such detail that there's now like a bunch of pages on this, and it covers everything, like managers who have imposter syndrome who are managing people with imposter syndrome. Yeah. So Atlassian stepped up, and it was great, right? And this continues today. We ran our most recent ship it a few weeks ago, and we actually did a refresh of this with new posters, new surveys, and we're getting a good index of how we've improved from 2015 to 2018. I don't know the answers and the responses right now, but we'll know soon, and hopefully we'll share those. But it's actually been really interesting because it's now a part of our standard onboarding as well. So when new starters started at Atlassian, they're actually given a very thorough briefing on what imposter syndrome is. Welcome to the company. There's the cafeteria. This is how you get your pay. This is your laptop. By the way, you're not a fraud, but if you feel like that, here's a bunch of information. Like, it's such a standard part of the onboarding now. Unfortunately, I didn't get that onboarding when I started at Atlassian. Now everyone does. But I'm glad that it's there. So the company managed to step up. I started getting some resource and information to help me out, and so did my managers and things like that as well. but not everyone has an Atlassian to help them out. And so I want to talk about a few of the tools that I've gained or kind of collected over the years. A really important thing to remember about tools is that they're not for everyone. Not one tool will do everything. And you'll need a collection. This is not a comprehensive collection, and you'll need to go and expand it yourself. But I want to give you a few ones that I know help me, and hopefully that'll get you started. Firstly, admit it. You have imposter syndrome, right? Deep down, maybe you don't think that you kind of belong, but on the surface you're like, nah, I belong here. Like, I'm smart. I should be here. But you're also at this talk, so maybe at least half of you thinks that you don't belong. You can work out which half is right later, but at least for the first instance, kind of admit that maybe this is a problem. It's not a label. It's not something that you attach to yourself and say, ha, I'm an imposter. That explains it. Because you might also be not great at things. Like, it's easy to start dismissing things. So just, it's a helpful tool, not a solution. Admitting it also helps you talk about it with other people, with coworkers, with friends, and you should do that. You should start talking about it. A helpful visualization exercise, which is not for everyone, is to actually think about it as an external thing from you. So imagine it like an IKEA lamp, right? You look through the lamp, through the catalog, you see the lamp, you're like, that's going to look great. You go and get it. Hopefully you're not going and getting imposter syndrome, but you bring it home and you put it in your lounge room and you realize, actually, that looks really, really ugly. It doesn't belong, it doesn't fit, and actually it's making me feel uncomfortable. I don't like the way that it's interacting with me or kind of like taunting me, but I also don't like the way I'm interacting with it. The great thing about externalizing it, maybe not in the physical form of a lamp, is that you can actually describe it. You can talk about how you are interacting with it, how imposter syndrome is actually impacting you, and you can see it as this external thing, which is quite helpful. You should also identify things that you're good at. The reason for this is not to get a great list of things like, hey, yeah, my resume, look at how awesome I am. You need to be honest with yourself and create a list of things that you are good at. Maybe you don't feel great about how you do your job or how you get your job done, and you do feel like an imposter at work, but you make amazing cakes. Write that down. Because you can then, by externalizing it, say, oh, I make cakes. I'm good at that. What does that make me feel like? How does that make me feel? Right? That goes back to building up your resilience. And you need to be able to do that both at work and at home. So being able to bake amazing cakes, you can bring one to me, it's fine. And that's something that you should acknowledge. I give a lot of talks, and I get asked for advice on a lot of talks from people inside the company who want to go and give a talk at a conference but don't feel like they actually have anything worth contributing. So they might feel like they're good at their job, but they see these other people who are giving talks on particular subjects, and they're like, smarter than me. I shouldn't be doing that. I can't do that. So I give them this technique, and I want to kind of share it with you very quickly. Firstly, you've got to think about, when you're trying to identify things that you're good at and worth sharing, is think about everyone in the world, right? There's a huge number of people, and you'll probably have a few things that you know that they don't, right? Skills, experience, things like that. Then think about it in the context of your company or your organization and think, well, okay, your organization has some very explicit and implicit ideas and concepts that only you guys do. And so therefore, you're one of however many people in your organization that only do that thing. Within that, you've got your department. And within that, your team. So if I think about this from my point of view, everyone in the world, then Atlassian, then my department, which is about 400-ish people, and then my team, which is only about 30-odd people, and then me, one of 3 people in our leadership group. So I know the things that I'm good at, or that I'm aware of, not necessarily good at, that maybe everyone else in the organization doesn't have. My manager and I work closely together on a lot of the initiatives that we do, but I'm still exposed to things on a day-to-day basis more than he would be. So I'm already kind of in front in that regard. So when you go through the funnel and you think about everyone versus you, it's easy to start at the top and go, okay, well, work your way down and filter through. But when you try and just go straight to the bottom and think about just the things that only you know or only you're good at, it's really hard to get there. So it's just a quick exercise that you can do, just mentally think through it when you're thinking of things to do. You should also recognize negative traps. These are negative thinking traps, and they're quite frustrating from a point of view of heading you down a negative thinking path. So it's like when someone gives you feedback and positive feedback and you just dismiss it straight away. It's really easy to just kind of ignore people and kind of, yeah, whatever, you know. I actually still think I'm crap at my job. But I just want to share a few of these traps with you and some of the coping skills you can use. So some are really destructive, which are, I just need to work harder. Right? You've set yourself a high standard, you've taken on too much responsibility, and now you've convinced yourself that actually you just need to work harder at what you're doing. You should stop anytime you feel like that's the solution to your problems. You should really just take a step back and think about the things you're doing versus the amount of time you've got to do them. It's also easy as you're doing something to think that it could be better, that you've got, you know, to make it perfect before you release it, or make it perfect before you give it or share it or talk about it with anyone else. We share everything really early. Everyone can see all the work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. It's daunting, but at the same time, it means that I never feel like things are perfect and out. They could be better, but they're already shared. So there's no pressure for me to continue working, and I'm not adding that pressure. It's also easy to ruminate and say, I could have done that better. Everyone could have done everything better, right? Like the feedback loop is about being able to say, I'll do it better next time, not feel bad about the fact that you didn't do it better this time. And lastly, interpreting feedback wrong. This is a really easy one to fall into, but it's also a really dangerous one. This is where people say, hey, I really loved the work that you did on that project. My initial response is generally to just go, well, you know, that's your opinion, man. Like, I think I did a really bad job, so I'm just going to leave that over there. But what you need to be able to do is just take a step back and say, actually, you know, you've given me some feedback. My initial response is to reply and say no or thanks and be embarrassed and just discard it. Now, the problem with that is that as soon as you do that, or as soon as you start going down everything that was wrong, you give two impressions. Either you verbalize that and you share that with the person and they see all the negative things that actually that you think went wrong, and they're like, oh, this person's crazy. Or you internalize it and you just dismiss their compliment straight away, and none of that goes to building your resilience. Right? You don't take that as a positive feedback and then, you know, bank that into your feel-good memory. And later when someone's criticizing you, go, but yeah, I did that other thing really well. So you just ignore it and you discard it. And then it's not there to draw on later. So a technique that you can use for this is to stop, breathe. Whenever anyone gives you feedback, just stop, breathe, take a second, and hear what they're saying. Now, it might be negative, constructive feedback, hopefully, negative feedback or positive feedback. But what you need to do is just stop, think about it, acknowledge the fact that they've given you some feedback, listen to it, think about why they've given it to you. Was it unsolicited? Solicited? Did you ask them for it? Or are you just kind of trying to play coy? Like, what is the feedback and what is its impact? Why did they think that way? And you can ask them that, but just be aware that maybe for a few seconds you've been staring at them rather blankly. It's a process. This is a tool that really works, but it's a very external tool. It was an internal tool, but it has a very external face, and this is normally it. Just be aware that these tools take time to develop and get good at, but doing them consciously and forcing yourself through it is a key part of getting on track and kind of having those coping skills. Pairing up is really important. Having that person that doesn't have imposter syndrome or the person that does have imposter syndrome, but who can tell you whether or not you are doing a good job and can pair with you and say, actually, you did do a good job on that, and I know because I'm good at my job, and so therefore I can tell you that. That's actually invaluable to me because then I know that actually I feel like I did a terrible job, but here's an independent voice that's holding me to account, and they will tell me when I do a bad job. And this is an important part of feedback, is being able to understand that not having that person means that I don't get any feedback at all. So if I don't ask for it, I don't seek it out, all I ever think is that people are negative about me and that my work's rubbish. I never improve. And I would have been on the fast track out of Atlassian. Because I sought feedback and I started trying to get help, I was able to understand that having that feedback meant that I stayed. And that years later, I'm actually doing pretty well, I think, I hope. It varies. You also need to believe that you can cope with negative feedback. Atlassian is a very confronting company when you start because the first thing people do is give you their opinion. And it's fairly unsolicited. It's very direct. But they mean it with no malice. They just want to know that they can share with you that you can improve or that something you're doing can improve and bring their experience as well. This is not bad. Traditionally thinking about a silo of your idea and your project, you might think that having outsiders come in and weigh in on something is bad. This has actually been really good. You can cope with negative feedback, especially if you're building up your resilience and you're focusing on the things that are positive. You can deal with the occasional negative comment. You can deal with the occasional late project. But do it in small bursts. Don't start big. Don't survey your whole company and be like, hey, how am I doing? Am I doing good? 1,500 responses varying between, I don't even know you, to probably, is not going to help, right? Like, you need to concentrate on an initial group of feedback, start with one person, spread out from there. I think, in terms of getting small bursts, you can also improve that and increase that, but it will give you the occasional negative feedback. It'll give you the occasional, really gratifying feedback, and you'll find that balance and you'll build up your resilience. But understand that there's a balance that you need to strike between your work and your home, and that if you deplete the resilience that you have at work, this is going to affect you at home too. And you don't need to wait until you're at work to build up that resilience. Make cakes, feel good about that. But also just unplug. Turn off from work. Really just step away from it and be okay with just being zen. Whether you sit in a hammock in the middle of the desert or whatever it is, you need to literally disconnect from everything that you're working on, not be constantly thinking about it and falling into those negative thinking traps. And if you find yourself in a situation like that, there's only two things I want you to take away. Stop, breathe, and use that as a cue that you need to do something else. You need to think about how you're thinking differently. You need to stop with your immediate response of feedback, or you need to disconnect because your reserves are too low. So if your resilience to negative feedback or your resilience to positive feedback, but feeling awkward about it, is really low, you need to be able to acknowledge that you need to stop, breathe, and treat that as an opportunity to say, I need a break, maybe I'll go for a walk, maybe I'll take today off. Thank you.